Hey there, my name is Mir and I'm a photographer from Texas. Today I want to introduce you to a new series that I'm starting called Photo Mode Perspective. The idea of it is very simple. I'll be looking at photo modes in different video games, but through the eyes of a photographer. For the sake of consistency, I'm going to ask 3 questions per video. Is the photo mode any good? What do some of the settings mean? And how do you take the photo mode and translate it into better photos, not only in the game but also in the real world with your camera or with your phone? Sound pretty good, right? So to kick things off, we're going to be looking at Spider-Man Miles Morales running on a PS5, which is out of focus. Great, awesome. So let's get started, shall we? So what we'll be looking at is the photo mode specifically, and here we're actually running this game on the fidelity mode, which is the 30 frames per second, ray tracing, and so on. We want the best looking images possible. Okay, so to access the photo mode is very, very simple. You just pause the game when you want, so we'll do that. Pause it, and then just go to photo mode. So this is what we'll do. I like this, where you got the sun, and you got him right there, posing in the middle of the air. So here we have different photo options. So we have the camera, how you can adjust the camera, the lens, so the different lens settings, filters and frames, overlays. There's a selfie camera. Oh, it looks like it's locked, so okay, that's fine. We can unlock it later. So for the camera type, so let's go through these. Camera type, we have the free mode, pretty self-explanatory. You can move around, no problem. Switch it over and you have the orbit, so it gets locked in close proximity, and then you have the selfie. Awesome. So let's go back to that selfie mode. Okay, so we have the emote. Okay, so it changes the size. Cool. What? Eye intensity. What does this do? Oh, okay, you can change each individual eye, like how open or closed you want it. Cool. Selfie light. Okay. Light intensity. Simple enough. Okay, so what we're going to focus on is the free camera. So in here, you can change the suit, you can change the tilt, so basically the rotation of the image. Let's say I can't see it on my, hero visibility, enemy visibility, and show weather. Okay, we'll leave those on. So then let's move on to the next one. Lens, here we go. So this is what I really want to look at, is the settings and how can these translate to real world applications. So the FOV, the field of view. So it looks like, okay, so the higher the number, the wider it gets. You got the exposure, which will brighten or darken the image. Focus distance, which we'll look at in just a second. Your aperture, which is very strange. I don't know why it's not measured in f-stops. Near distance focus and your near aperture. Okay, so we'll start with the field of view. One thing I'm noticing is with wide angle lenses, there's actually, let's do it this way. There's 2 things when it comes to lenses. You have your compression and you have your distortion. So with wide angle lenses, they have distortion. What that means is that if you look at Miles, so Miles is the subject here, right? The very end of this street here where that building is, with the little dome at the top, that will be, of course, the background. So with a wide angle lens and distortion, what it ends up doing is that if you have your subject, the background will be, it'll distort it where it looks like the background is much further away. Like if you're focusing on something right here and then you have your background, you can tell in the image with the wide angle distortion that the background is far away. Now if we go the other route, the telephoto side, zoom in right into his butt, what it ends up doing, it narrows your field of view essentially, so you have like a more focused area of what you're looking at. But this is where compression comes into play. So that same building with that dome that you see right there, it looks like it's a lot closer, so the image is compressed. So you have Miles there, and then you have the building, and it looks like the building is right there behind him. But if you go the other way, you can tell right there that that building is far away. It's distorted with the wide angle. That's what actual lenses look like. To translate it, a wide angle would be something like a 16 millimeter, 16 to 18 millimeter. That seems to be like the common focal length of wide angle lenses. And then telephoto would be like 85, 135, 200 millimeters. And that one, you'll get that compression and that distortion. Now, another thing to keep in mind with those things, so with wide angle, let's say you can get the entire, scape of this, but if I were to get close to Miles, there, let's go the other way. I don't want to stare at his butt anymore. So if you get close to him, you can definitely tell that background is much further away. Now, what I like about this field of view is that if you try to go telephoto, it zooms in way too close where you don't even see him. So if you were to do that with a camera or with like the telephoto lens on a phone, what you would have to end up doing is you have to move back. So with a wide angle, you can get closer, but the background is going to be further away. And then if you go the opposite direction with the telephoto, to get the subject in the shot, you'd have to move back. You can zoom in, and then it'll give you that compression. So now it looks like the building is right there next to him. So that's pretty cool, that even though it doesn't show the focal length of the lens, the wide or the telephoto, it's still pretty cool that it gives you the effect of compression and distortion. So once you practice with those, once you use those more often and get an understanding, you can get some cool shots. So let's do this. Oh, sorry, my bad. Your friendly neighborhood Spider-Man is coming through. Didn't mean to knock you over. So let's do this. Let's actually go into the middle of the street here. Hey, what's up? So with the wide angle distortion, what I like here, actually here, I can turn on this overlay. So these little grid lines, they're called the rule of thirds, right? The thing is, they're not actual rules, they're guidelines. You can obviously break these rules and just be creative with your photography, but rule of thirds is probably the most common composition overlay that you'll see. It's in your phone, it's in cameras, it's just whatever. If you go into like something like Adobe Lightroom, you can cycle through different ones and it'll give you different overlays. But we're just going to focus on this one only because it's the most common. So the rule of thirds, how it basically works is that when you have a subject in the line where the lines intersect, then that gives it like a nice clean composition. Of course, it's not like always the case. You can also do, someone in the middle, and then frame, this like the landscape around the subject. It's pretty simple to understand, but what we're going to do is we're going to focus on him in the middle like this. So this is why I turn on this overlay. With a wide angle lens with the distortion, what it ends up doing is that it ends up stretching the image, right? So like your background, it's much further away than where your subject is. So if I move this down, so we'll do something like this. If you notice, look at the sidewalk and look at the street in general. So with wide angle, you can have fun with the distortion. And here you can see the sidewalk and like the street and so on. It's creating these lines and it's pointing straight to the building. These are called leading lines. So it's basically directing your eye to the point at the end. If you see some sort of long hallway, if you want to really accentuate in a photo that, hey, this hallway is long, or these staircases are long, or escalator or something, like you can use a wide angle and it'll give you that stretched out effect. That'll help tremendously. So you can see it here. Now if I do it the other way, same thing, you'll get the leading lines. Like you got the cars, just look at the cars on the left, and it's lining up and it's going towards a point in the middle, which again, leading lines. This is a pretty cool way to check out distortion and compression. Next up, we'll look at the exposure. So with a lot of cameras, you have like a exposure compensation dial, so you can have different settings in auto. Like once the camera looks at a scene, it'll look at it and be like, okay, this is how it's correctly exposed, like this is how it's supposed to look. And then sometimes you'll be like, I don't know, this doesn't look right. So exposure compensation dial, you can compensate for the exposure and just say, hey, like, no, this needs to be a little brighter, this needs to be a little darker. So that's what this is right here. And generally speaking, with exposure, you'll hear that a lot with cameras, and it's part of what you're supposed to do. If you go into Lightroom, that's one of the very first sliders you'll see is the exposure. So what would help in this, and it's kind of hard to do in a video game, but like let's say the sun was really bright here, right? And you look at this image and you're like, man, this image is overexposed. It's way too bright. I need to bring it down. So you can bring down the exposure and it recovers some detail. So like here, it'll recover like that blooming effect over the sun. So you'll see more detail, but if you go the other way, you lose a lot of that detail. It's the same thing when you're editing a photo, like especially a raw photo. If you ever try to edit a JPEG, you can get away with just a little bit before the image starts breaking apart. So if you edit an image, do it in RAW, and then change the exposure, and you'll see. So focus distance and aperture. Okay, let's take a look at these. Now, aperture is actually marked by f-stops. Here, I'll show you on this lens. Hopefully you can see it. Basically, you have these numbers at the bottom of this lens, and they from here, like this is a Pentax Takumar 55mm f1.8. So what the 1.8 stands for is that's the widest it's opened up. So if you look at this lens, f1.8. So if I stop it down, as it's called, so we'll go to like f8, f11. What it's doing is that it's actually closing the blades on the inside. So we're at f11. So that's like a little pinhole now. And then we'll go back to f1.8. What aperture does, marked by f-stops, closes up the blades on the inside of the lens, and it controls the amount of light hitting the sensor of the camera. And just a quick side note, there's another thing called T-stops, and those are on cinema lenses. I'm not going to go into technical details about that. You won't hear it as often because they're cinema lenses, but f-stop, that's the common one. That's one you should probably learn. Anyway, so with aperture, it limits the amount of light going into your sensor, but it also controls your depth of field as well. So the easiest way to remember it is the higher the f-stop number. So right now I'm pointing at f16. The higher the number, the more the lens is closed, right? So smaller number, lens is wide open, and the higher the number, lens is closed. When you're looking up lenses, you'll see them marked as like this one, 55mm f1.8, and every lens that you try to buy is always going to say that. And what that means is it's the maximum aperture. That's the widest it's going to open. So some lenses, they'll be f4, some lenses will be f2.8, some of them will be variable aperture, so it'll be f3.5 to f5.6. So here I have my Fujifilm 55-200 telephoto lens, and at 55mm it'll be f3.5, and at 200mm, you know, once I extend it all the way, it's at f4 point something. I think it was like f5. I forget what it was. It's not f3.5. So sometimes you'll see like zoom lenses, they'll have a variable aperture. So on one end it'll be, you know, f whatever, the smaller number, and on the other end it'll be a bigger number, and then that means the aperture is a little bit closed in. With the aperture, the depth of field comes into play. So let's see if I can try to simulate what I'm trying to talk about. Whenever you look at photos of, like, let's say models or things like that, or this model, for example, Miles, you'll see the person or the subject is in focus, but the background is all blurry. That's achieved by having a wide open aperture, or the lowest number possible. So with that lens, it was f1.8. In this, it doesn't give me f-stop, so I can't really judge what the aperture is. But that's what an aperture does, is that it'll basically control how much of the field is in focus. So if you have something like f1.8, even like f1.4, you basically have like a little slice, like a little sliver to work with, and basically that little bit right here, so if I that right there, that's how much you're allowed to get in focus. So if you focus on, let's say, someone's face, what will end up happening is that their face will be in focus, but then their shoulders might not be, because that's how razor thin the depth of field is. But if you go the opposite direction, if you go to a higher aperture, so if you go into like f11, for example, then that little sliver opens up, so you have more to play with. So if I do this here, if I go down on this aperture range, that to me is simulating me stopping down from like f1.4 or whatever, or like let's say this is f2 to f11. So there's more in focus. So you have the subject that's in focus, then you have the background that's also in focus. So like if I were to do this, like let's say if I increase this aperture slider and I go to the focus distance, what I'm seeing here is that it's more, that little slice that I was talking about is just opening up, but it's keeping the same aperture, and so it's giving you this very unnatural look where the stuff behind that statue is all blurry, but then you have all that space from the statue to Miles that's in focus, and that just is not possible with a lens. I mean, you can do it in like Photoshop or something. Like you can add that blur effect, but doing it in camera with the lens is just not going to work. So what you would have to do is change the focus distance to make it match an actual real world lens. What we're going to do is we're going to focus just on Miles, and you'll have that happen to you a lot as well. If you're shooting in f1.4 and so on, that'll happen. So we'll have Miles in focus. Turn down the aperture a little bit. So let's say this is like f4. I'll say that looks pretty good. That looks like something you could actually take a picture of. Here, let me hide the UI. Yeah, you can take a picture similar to that in the real world. That's pretty neat. Moving on. So we're going to move to the filters and frames. So filter type. So these Instagram filters, I'm not like a huge fan of Instagram filters. They're just not for me. What I prefer to do is take photos and put them in Lightroom and just edit them, give them my own style or try different styles and so on. Instead of a preset one, I'd like to try different things from time to time or try to go for a consistent look. If you want to see, my Instagram is right here. You can check out the photos I've taken. They're going to be mainly cars because I'm a car photographer, but you'll get the idea. So what we're going to do, let's try, just for the heck of it, we're going to try this vapor filter out. So it's a little strong though, so we're going to change this blend, tone it down a bit. I'd say that looks better. And then, frame selection. That's cool. Why is he touching it? Dude, you gotta stop touching them, bro. Anyway, so these are cool. These are cool little frames. You can mess around. Oh my god, it's a cat. Can I? Yes, I can. Oh yes. Oh yes. This is beautiful. I love this. This I like this one because this one is something similar. The frame is something similar to what you would see on Instagram. That's cool. They like it. Don't be afraid to crop your images. Like that's completely okay. A lot of cameras nowadays, they have good sensors, and even phones, like to an extent, you can crop it. Yes, this is what I see daily. I think I like this one. It's like a cinematic crop bars. Okay, we'll just do that. All right, so vignette, which will add like a dark circle on the edges of the screen. Yeah, there you go. You don't want to overdo a vignette because then it just looks weird. Unless you're going for like a spooky thing, then a vignette, just be subtle with it. Not every image is gonna need a vignette anyway. And what it ends up doing is kind of direct someone's eye to the subject. Sharpening. Look at the outline around his eyes. You see that? Right there, like where his nose would be. That spot that's glowing. If I increase the sharpness, look at that. So you'll see that. If you go too hard with the sharpening, you'll get this like, disgusting look where it's just, it doesn't produce a clean image. It just looks like, it looks pretty bad. Sometimes you want the sharpening, but use it, sparingly. So let's turn this down. And we'll probably keep it at a 10. Keep it pretty tame. So there's some things right above this little box with the square button. So you have the camera mode, and you have a light mode and a sticker mode. Let's check out the light mode. Aha! There's the light. Cool. So what we're gonna do is put this light around here. Hold on, let me change this filter real quick. Okay, yeah, let's turn off that filter. So from what it looks like, this light orbits around him. What I see is like the most common is having a light kind of off center, so somewhere around here. So it creates a little shadow on one side of his face. So intensity, how bright do we want it? Red hot? Nah, let's bring it down a little bit. Here's a tip. This could be an equivalent to working with flashes or speed lights or constant lighting. You can do that as well. What you want to do is get the background exposed, so make sure the background is properly lit. And so in this case, you know, the background looks good, but Miles is a little too dark. So that's where a flash or some sort of light will come in handy. I think that's a little too high. Here, we'll increase this intensity. So if we go too far, that just looks way off. But what you want to do is kind of meet somewhere in the middle. Do it in such a way where it looks kind of balanced. I would say that looks pretty good. So the background is exposed, and then Miles himself is also lit up. So you can also turn on and off shadows. I don't know why you'd want to turn off shadows, because shadows always give it a dramatic effect. Okay, and then you can change the intensity of the color. Okay, this I like better. So I have like a little red, but tone it down so it's not as in your face. Spread and softness, I'm guessing that's for the spotlight. Yep, that's what I thought. Okay, so that little cone, the little spread, it opens, closes. This cone changes how, like, where you want to direct the light. So if you wanted to, you could probably, so you can just light up his face. If you wanted to, you can light up his logo, you can light up his shoulder, so you can have more focused lighting. Okay, and then the softness. So yeah, if you use a flash with no softbox in front of it, nothing to diffuse the light, then it's just gonna get, you'll see like you can see that like on his chest, where it's like the light is just a light, it's just one spotlight. But changing the softness, so like adding a softbox, it'll soften up the light and give it a more natural look and more pleasing look. I like the sphere light. I like this one, where it just lights him up. It's cool. So I like this lighting option. Look at, and then the stickers. So these stickers, these are just fun. Yes, I got a trophy. Rotate Spider-Man Miles Morales, the official thumbnail maker for YouTube. Alright, so this is what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna make a thumbnail. I've been told, and I've watched a ton of YouTube videos on thumbnails, and they say thumbnails with faces get more clicks. I don't know if this is gonna work as a thumbnail. I don't know if I'm gonna get more clicks, but you know what? I'm gonna try it anyway. We're gonna have some fun. I actually like the way that looks. It looks pretty good. Turn this overlay off. And yeah, I'm more than likely gonna use this as a thumbnail because that looks really good.
Oh, Christmas tree. Oh, Christmas tree. Thy leaves are so unchanging. Oh, Christmas tree. Thy leaves are so unchanging.
I would say that looks pretty good for a YouTube thumbnail. That's it's amazing. You know, I don't understand why I still have Photoshop to make thumbnails when I could just be doing it in the game. So I'm going to save this because this is beautiful. I love it. So question 1, is this photo mode any good? Yes, this photo mode is fantastic. They have some good settings in there, some good features. The settings in this, the effect of the setting is very similar to what you would see in the real world, but how they're named is just slightly different. So the aperture, for example, it's just a slider with some numbers on it. Apertures are marked by f-stops. It's got some cool settings in here. Kind of wish they were a little bit more detailed so that it matches like a camera, but hey, it's fine. If you wanted to practice your photography, you can definitely do it in this game. The biggest thing for me was the compression and the distortion. So the field of view, the wide and telephoto, you can definitely mess around with those and give a similar result in the real world. You can practice here without spending a lot of money on a camera, and then once you get a camera, then you'll kind of have a head start. So I've left a link below where you can go ahead and buy me a cup of coffee because I'm very, very tired. but also to help me buy more games that I can look at the photo modes. And there's some games I have lined up that I have in mind that I would like to take a look at. But if you have some suggestions, leave them down below. I want to hear them. I want to see what you guys think. And as of right now, I have a PS5, PS4. But I'll be using my PS5 for that. I have a Switch and I have a PC. Unfortunately, no Xbox, but if the Xbox game is on PC, especially on Game Pass, I could more than likely download it and take a look at it. So, hope you guys enjoyed it, and I'll see you guys next time.